You're not picking that up. Yeah, I think we're ready to go.
Is there a countdown?
There's a countdown.
3, 2.
Hello and welcome back to CAIRNcast. This is episode 3, I believe.
Yeah.
Although technically the fourth one you might have seen, but we're assured that having an episode 0 makes a lot of sense. So, welcome to episode 3. Today we're having a really interesting conversation, something that we're really passionate about, and that is around the topic of accessibility in specialty coffee. I've got a note down here which just simply says coffee is a minefield. And I think for a lot of people, ourselves included, it's some way down the path of learning coffee. It has been a minefield for us. It can be quite an intense environment when you're not fully aware of all of the information required to be a part of it, if that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's another note. We've actually got notes again this week. It's fantastic.
We're just name dropping the notes.
Yeah, it's another one of those things like wine or beer where some people know more than other people. Some people like to show you that they know more than other people. And I think a big thing for me when I joined you, and we talk about this a lot, is I like accessibility for all. I know you like that as well. It should never be the case where someone feels they are unwelcome in an environment because they don't know enough about something. So I think that's been quite a big part of what we've tried to do over the last 12 months is make it more accessible. So,
do you know an interesting thing is, and this is something I've kind of said to staff in the past, and it's all about the culture that we're almost supporting a coffee culture in Scotland or in the UK, and in us trying to educate customers about how they should drink their coffee. And in some cases, those people might have been drinking coffee for 50, 60 years. Yeah. And it's like, what do you know about what I like? Or what do you know? It can be quite entitled in a sense that we're making observations based sometimes upon how they look or their age or various other aspects. On how we think they might enjoy their coffee, and that's gone quite deep. But I think it's funny that we can, as an industry, and I think largely what we'll talk about is that we've made massive inroads away from this. But certainly from my experience coming in 10 years ago, and maybe further beyond that, it was quite an unhospitable environment. And I found that notion quite interesting of like trying to educate someone who has been getting up every morning and making their own coffee for 60 years. And suddenly you're like, well, I've been working in specialty coffee for 2 years. This is actually what you should be tasting.
But obviously I think that's part of the flip side as well, is that when you're growing up and say maybe your family are drinking Nescafe sort of instant coffee is a bitter, weird tasting thing. So I think most people's first experience of coffee is bitter, you chuck some milk in it. It's not that tasty a drink, especially as say you're a teenager getting into coffee and then you're starting maybe to drink it more as you get into your early 20s, into uni, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's where speciality can taste amazing. So getting really good single origin coffees, really good blended coffees can taste amazing. And it's almost, like you are saying there, some people have been used to drinking coffee for 60 years and think that is what it has to taste like. And it's, again, we're not saying it's not that it tastes like that. It's just that there's many other ways it can taste. Like someone who's into their wine, not all wine tastes the same. I used to hate wine. And now I'm really, really getting into red wine. And I don't know why all of a sudden I'm really getting into red wine, but I'm absolutely loving it. So it's very similar.
You hear people saying, like, I like white wine, but I don't really like red. Yeah. And it's like, I would imagine to a wine expert in the same way that I would, I'm not trying to coin myself as a coffee, but,
Mr. Coffee.
I'd be like, well, you can't just say you don't like natural coffees because there's a whole world of natural coffee in the same way that red wine is very complex. But I think going back to the point about, it's like people are allowed to know what they like, and they don't need to be challenged on it all the time.
I think that was exactly what I was going to say. You can like what you like. And I think, so like what you like and don't be made to feel stupid. But I guess what we're here to hopefully try and do in this episode is probably provide a bit more clarity And then part of what we've gone down the route of, and we'll talk about it on our packaging, is providing that clarity so people can then be like, oh, I actually like this type of, maybe not necessarily coffee, maybe it's not a process being washed or different types of processes, but they can hopefully start from the color coding that we use, start to recognize what coffees they like.
Yeah. And it's all about then creating a comfortable environment, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that when they come back into the shop, so they go back onto our online store, also available online, they can feel comfortable and that they liked a red the last time.
Yeah.
They might want to get a red again the next time, which is
so I guess we've got here, so my entry into it, and I can probably talk, a bit about my dad, who I've kind of, in the last 12 months, got into coffee more. And I can find, every time I take him a coffee, he likes the red ones that I take him. So he has no clue what the coffee is, no clue whether it's washed. All he knows is that the ones, he doesn't even know the reds. I just take him reds, and then he's like, oh yeah, those are the ones I like. If I take him a purple, does not like a purple.
Too funky.
So, but from my own personal experience, it took me ages to get into coffee. So I was about 26 before I started drinking coffee. And then it was really that Starbucks golden roast. Is it the golden roast? Golden blend?
I don't know, because they've got like the blonde.
Yeah, the blonde, that was it. It's blonde roast.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's their like,
oh yeah,
we'll upsell you for 20p.
Oh, money.
Yeah,
that's how you get me. Make something 20p more expensive and I'm buying it. So yeah, I started live on the, what was it? Blonde roast.
I think the other one's called like the Pike place. I don't know why I know so much about Starbucks.
You do. Do you know what, even worse? Pike Before that, I used to get, not even worse, I used to get, I loved a vanilla latte. Yeah. But everyone what you like. And I do like what I like.
I think that's actually fun.
But I think it's because I love sugary stuff.
Yeah.
So
but I guess at the end of the day, it's we talk. Jack is kind of our passion project for getting him into coffee. I would say.
Yeah.
And I think you can't expect someone to go from not liking coffee to liking special release coffees by Cairngorm, which tend to be the most complex or the most kind of exotic tasting.
Yeah.
The likes of a vanilla syrup can be the kind of driver to get people along the path towards that. But it doesn't happen overnight. So, it's all a part of the process.
Well, definitely, because I graduated from that quite quickly, I would say, to then preferring black coffee. So quite quickly after that, I got into, like an Americano. And then I was like, ooh, what's a long black? Again, long black sounds fancier than Americano, doesn't it? So I started getting into long blacks. And then I think...
less long
than
an Americano.
Yes. Yeah,
generally speaking.
Very confusing name. But
just like a flat white is
smaller.
Is actually not flat.
That's not.
It's
you're confusing me. You're confusing everyone else with all the names. We could get into the names. We could probably do another podcast on the names. But I think, again, there's a conception that having black coffee is better than having white coffee as well.
More elite.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that was probably the kind of impression that I was getting, is that I should be drinking black coffee. And I think now I've kind of gone full circle a little bit and I'm back into, loving an oat flat white. But I do think there is that obvious progression where you need milk and maybe sugar at the start. It's quite hard to go straight in, on the black coffee, and then gradually I progressed onto that. But again, I'm saying this is Starbucks. And then this is when I was in Hong Kong, there was a cafe that opened up near our office, which was specialty and single origin, and started getting long blacks from there. Cannot remember, but they have
because they've got a good scene over there.
Yeah, really good, really good. So
there's a place called the Cupping Room. Are you talking about Hong Kong?
Yeah, it could have been that.
The Cupping Room, he was like a 5-star barista champion or something. I went. It was great.
Yeah. So
and then Arabica. Is that
Arabica? Is it Arabica?
Yeah, it's like the percentage.
Yeah.
But they're moved over to East Coast of New York.
We're like
East Coast of America, sorry.
9 grams as well, I want to say something like that.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's what kind of got me into it, was that place opening up. And then I was like, oh, I'll maybe go get a long black from there. I was like, oh, that tastes really, really good. So, mine's a bit different. Again, you obviously worked in a cafe, and previous episode we obviously talked about you not getting coffee right at the start of opening that cafe.
Yeah.
So I do think it's not something you learn overnight. But again, it's a part of that, is it? Because sometimes you can be made to feel a little bit uncomfortable when you first go into a specialty coffee shop.
Yeah, like for me, 100%. I think that they're not always an environment where you want to put yourself out there by asking a question in fear of being shut down. But I think I insinuated earlier that I do think there's been a lot of progress on that front. I think that was over 9 years ago when I was having those experiences. And that was the experience you had, everywhere, like from London to the north of Scotland. If it was a specialty cafe, there was a level of credibility that went along with that generally speaking made the people who worked there feel slightly elite.
Yeah.
And that it's not like a diss on, because I'm sure there's many people who would argue that we were part of that camp. In our first few years, people probably felt uncomfortable coming in, but I would argue that it's not necessarily an intentional. There's no motive for people to come across non-accessible. Yeah. I think it's all about just we, as an example, wouldn't have thought about, okay, how does us saying this or presenting our menu in this way make people feel? And we're not psychologists. We don't understand consumer behavior. It's it's a challenge. And, we've talked at length about Treen and how, you put a lot of thought into even places where things are positioned within the shop to think about consumer behavior. And it's, you do the same for an e-commerce website. You should do the same for a cafe. And I think it's something that doesn't always kind of get enough attention, probably. Yeah. But it's certainly something that's coming to the forefront of our minds, really partially through the exploration of trying to make the packaging improved, which has kind of fed us into trying to make other aspects of the cafe environment much more hospitable and friendly. Yeah.
And I think it all comes, and you've written down the word lexicon here, which I think basically means the words that are used. Is that correct?
Yeah. Kind of like the vocabulary that is used within an industry, I guess.
There you go. Did you know that? Okay.
Yeah. There's also a drink, I think, isn't there?
Is it?
Oh no, that's Rubicon.
That is Rubicon.
Lexapro.
So there's a complicated lexicon, but I think coffee is one of those things where, I'll reference wine again. Wine, you can get a large or a small wine, whereas coffee, again, the complexity is provided where Starbucks have 3 or 4 different sizes. Mm-hmm. We then have in our shop long black, cortado. There's lots of words used in coffee shops.
And it's assumed what sizes they are.
Exactly. Whereas if I'm in a wine bar, I'm getting a large glass of wine or a small glass of wine. Mm-hmm. So then you add in on top of that, words that we discussed last week, where we've obviously released the kind of tongue-in-cheek merch to do with niche coffee processes. But, you start talking about carbonic maceration, even start talking about naturals and washed, there's a lot of words that go into your cup of coffee.
Yeah, huge amount. And I think a lot of it is as well is about trying to describe like a taste journey or like a flavor profile that someone can expect. And I think often that is somewhere that misses the mark. So already you've got this varietal, which you maybe don't understand. Like if we're using the wine example, you would think there would be quite a lot of crossover, and so carbonic maceration is one where there is crossover between two. But like I don't have a clue what to expect personally from like a Pinot Grigio next to a Chardonnay. Like I think Chardonnay is maybe drier. I feel like that's making me, but I feel like me admitting that makes me look a bit stupid. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that people probably will just like if you say to someone, "Oh, do you want this carbonic macerated Colombian with flavor notes of panela sugar, or would you like the Yirgacheffe Ethiopian fully washed that's got more kind of peach notes?" You can see their face kind of, I'll go for the second one. And that's just because that was the last one they heard. But and all that does a disservice to our customer service. We're not really giving them the information that they need to actually make a decision which would impact their experience.
But you know, it's a disservice end to end, isn't it? So like the farmer who's put a lot of effort into growing the coffee, to the importer maybe who's gone to sourcing it, and I think this is where people maybe don't quite understand it. If you are nichely involved in an industry, the end consumer, the customer, is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. So if you cannot explain your product properly and quickly to a customer, then it's what's the point? Essentially, it's and I think that's where we have to be turning what the farmer's done and best representing that as clearly as possible for a customer.
I was going to say go down a massive tangent, saying also the customer is the most important part, but the argument would be part of specialty's job is to also make sure the producer, as you said, is high up on that list of the most important things. Yeah. And I think part of the problem with how we've got to this point with overcomplicating things is that we want to try and do the best service to the producers we can. So we feel like, oh, well, if he's done this, we should try and explain that to the customers. And so I guess the argument on our side certainly is not that this information shouldn't be available, but it's more, can we put a spin on it which makes it more understood by the customer? Because if they switch off as soon as you say carbonic maceration, then they don't get to the point that explains that Francisco Morales gives money to the local children for the coffee that's sold. For sure, it's like they're already lost. Yeah. And I feel like some of that information probably adds a more human element to the coffee than saying carbonic maceration, which seems quite cold and like sounds like something's done in a lab, which in some cases it might. But so we did an experiment ages ago, I think, when we were trying to decide what information should be a part of our lexicon or our packaging, and we looked at the back of 7 or 8 bottles of wine, and the simple question was like, which one would we want to drink the most? Yeah, and generally speaking, it was the ones which had less information. Yeah, because we're making a quick decision in a wine shop. We don't want to be checking the story of every producer. So it was like, how can you get information over quite succinctly, but the important stuff? And for a large part, it was based on flavor. It's like that is the thing which is most accessible for the most amount of people. Is like, does this taste dry or does it not taste wet? But does this taste dry, or does it have fruit forward profile, or does it taste like cherry, or does it taste like nutmeg? And like those things start to tell a story about the coffee, the wine, or the coffee that you might want to buy. Yeah.
We keep using wine as an example, but I think it is a very good example, and I think something wine industry does quite poorly. That wine bottle thing was a very good exercise. Like sometimes we do smart things, which I think our generation as well, not as inclined maybe to know your Pinot Noirs and all that kind of stuff that maybe previously people did know. I don't know why I've made a massive generalization there. Maybe people do know that stuff, but quite often what really gets us going is packaging. So I think when we did that, like you're saying, it was to do with tasting notes and things like that, but quite often the coolest packaging wins. And we've discussed that as well. So
I was in the shop the other day and I picked up a bottle and I was like, everything about this is something I would like, but I don't like the look of the bottle. And I did buy it, but reticently. I genuinely was like, I like blends from South Africa. This was from Stellenbosch. I was like, I've been there. There's a lot that like draws me to it. Yeah. But it was literally like the color of the glass was not my vibe. It was pretty uncool.
Are we going to start a wine podcast? Maybe next?
But like, it's funny, isn't it? It does. There's so many, and this goes back to consumer behavior. It's like there are so many aspects which that make you want to buy something before you've even read the back of a bottle.
I think again, just to reference another industry, but the beer cans are very similar. I think the look and feel of a beer can now is very, very important.
Bacon.
Beer.
Oh, bacon. I thought you were saying bacon in a Jamaican accent.
No, so like a cool beer can.
Yeah. Can't not hear now. So
it's neither can I. I do see what you're saying though. Yeah. Good looking, and there's so many of them out now, and I do feel that's probably half the battle a lot of beer producers are going for, is trying to make their cans look the coolest.
And they've got to a point in their industry where it's okay to to have a ridiculous, funny print on a can that looks cool and people can buy it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I guess the answer to that would be because the hops and these things are being grown in a country which rewards fair pay and all these kind of things. So
Yeah.
they maybe don't feel there's as much of a duty to highlight the producer of these raw materials as much as possible. It's usually more focused on the brewery that made it than it is whether it's Citra hops or whatever, Mosaic hops or whatever else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I generally speaking, but there are things which that I know I like, and I guess those are what make them more accessible for me. Like I like it 6.5% ish, and I like it to not be
As in volt ABV wise.
Yeah, I like it to feel it. Not on a session, obviously.
No, I'm a 3.5% kind of guy, but I like.
Come and join me in the big leagues when you get a chance.
Oh. That's
probably broken up a massive tangent.
Yeah, it has.
Anyway,
to get back to your notes, you've written DAC, milky cake.
Okay, yeah. As a good example of, in my eyes, a coffee roaster who is going down a route which is kind of different to the route that, in the back of my head, I always felt was like the rules of specialty.
Yeah. It's
like you have to always just call it by the farmer name. Like when we've done it in the past, we've called a coffee Escape or we've called a coffee, Naughty or Nice. There's always been a pang of slight guilt in me that's doing the producer a disservice. Yeah. And it's maybe, not advocating highly enough for the work that's been done.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're paying the producer fairly for the coffee, and your job is then to go out there and sell it.
Yeah.
So that you can buy more. I think they do a great job of using interesting flavor descriptor names that are super accessible. Like Milky Cake gives me a really clear vision of what it might taste like. They've got Watermelon Sugar is another good example of. It's not a DAC fanboy episode, but I think that is a detachment from the normally trodden route of specialty that I actually love.
But we can get into that as well, and I think we talked about this previously on another kind of video last year, that using a name like Watermelon Sugar is a marketing tactic as well. So as much as it's trying to provide a note around the taste of the coffee, it is also there because it's a famous song. So it's like...
Is it?
Just big Grammy award.
Just won the Grammys.
Whoa. We love.
Put in a hashtag Harry Styles.
We do love a bit Harry Styles.
We have mentioned his name.
If he could be on the pod, that'd be great. So yeah, I think we will chat about that later, probably around how we've tried to move slightly more down that route as well. That you need to provide tasting notes which are actually tasty, and marketable as well. Yeah, there's no point writing wool. I was trying to think of what like.
But we've had chats where we've had to be transparent with each other to be like, this could either taste like this thing or that thing.
Yeah.
But we probably want to encourage ourselves to think more along that line because that sounds more interesting to a customer, which might be seen as a slightly disingenuous. But at the end of the day, it is a product we're trying to sell.
Well, we're talking, I guess, about accessibility here, and that's another part of that is the tasting notes, in the sense that not everyone's going to taste the same as a tasting note. So I think if me, you, Matt, Hannah, Kay, all on the cupping table in the roastery, we can all get slightly different tasting notes. You shouldn't be a million miles apart, but you definitely will get different notes essentially. So again, I think there's a pressure always when you put stuff down. If people don't feel the same way, they feel stupid, I think that's quite often when you're standing around a cupping table, for example, you can feel a bit stupid because you're like, I'm not tasting
100%.
Well, I can't remember the flowers you guys always say. What was it?
Jasmine.
There's another
flower. Violet.
Another flower.
Is that a flower?
I don't even know what a jasmine tastes like. But
No.
So
I completely agree.
Yeah. So again, it's part of that accessibility thing. I think hibiscus. That's it. I'm like, what does hibiscus taste like? Part of the accessibility thing again, you need to provide tasting notes that people are like, oh, I know what that tastes like.
I 100% it's been a driver, I think, for us for a couple of years now. Whereas, it is, let's try and think of things which there's a wider topic beyond this, but try and think about things which people actually can relate to. So they're, because at the end of the day, you're trying to make them decide between one coffee and another coffee.
Yeah.
And if there's one coffee that's like chocolate and another coffee which is hibiscus, like some people will be drawn towards hibiscus, but the majority of people won't have a clue what that tastes like. And if you're spending, coffee prices are going up.
Yeah.
If you're going to be spending £15 on a box of coffee,
Yeah.
you want to go with the safe bet.
Yeah.
If you're unsure. So
you don't know if the hibiscus one's maybe a bath bomb.
Yeah.
Potentially.
But we should maybe, we should have done a test. We could do a test. I've secretly done bits and pieces in my head, or I've been like, in my head, let's put chocolate on this one and see if that sells more than this one. But generally speaking, that does.
So I think timing wise, I think today's episode will probably be a bit quicker, but we're into our crisp break. Because I think after this, we're going to talk about obviously how we do our boxes and I guess the tasting notes and all that kind of stuff. An interesting one as well around blends versus single origin from that point of view. Because again, we'll talk about why maybe you do a blend. You've talked about this before on a video maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
I had more hair in that video. I think that must have been just as COVID was coming out.
Yeah, it must have been. But it's a very...
I wasn't sure. Yeah, as in like...
Yeah. Robbie needs
just talk about the elephant in the room. I'm going bald, clearly, from that last video.
He's not going bald.
I'm going bald.
He's not going bald. Poor guy. Everyone just write something nice about Robbie's hair in the comments. You just need a haircut.
You're going to touch me up in After Effects. Spray my hair.
No.
Instagram stories, Paul, is Robbie going bald.
Yeah, I'm maybe going bald. Like,
we're all getting old.
I'm going to
too many crisps.
So today's quite a plain set.
Oh, have you got them ready?
Yeah, well, I just thought these are...
They're plain.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. I think they're quite spicy. Jack, can we have some more coffee?
Yeah, it's under here.
Oh, shit.
So you can do that while we've got Chris set up.
Because these are going to coat to my mouth. Oh, I'm doing good. We're halfway. We've done the bulk of the chat already. We've got a rugby podcast to film still. If you haven't already heard, we do a bonus episode every week during the Six Nations where we preview and talk about the last rugby podcast. So sorry that I was interrupting your presentation of our crisps.
Yeah.
Which are?
So it's Cheetos, twisted, flaming hot. They're not that hot, to be fair, but we do have a problem here that I really like all the crisps. Like, we need to get maybe some crisps we don't like. I think Jack's obviously recommended Doritos, and I can tell you now I really do not like Doritos. So.
These are the most tooth-coating things ever.
They are quite tooth-coating.
Lucky I've been for my dentist appointment. Got a couple of lids on there.
Not that spicy. They're quite sweet.
They are quite sweet.
Yeah. Which is maybe why I like them again. So
I would give them 8.5 out of 10. Well, yeah, I like them a lot.
Well, that's good. I probably
very Moorish.
Not as high as that because they feel cheap. They obviously say 39p on the bag, so they are cheap.
So have you been led by the packaging there?
The packaging's garbage.
If I said £3, you'd be like, "Oh, these are."
No, because they are like.
They even twist them.
So obviously you were absolutely destroying the Mackies last week, but
no,
I bumped into James Taylor as well down. Absolutely destroying the Mackies.
Me old mucker, what was he saying? Was he saying, "How's Robbie?"
No, he wasn't. Those crisps. God, why did I just call them chips? Those crisps are like slices of potato. You can clearly see that they are sliced potato. These
very appetizing
are corn maize. There's not a bit of potato in these, so
it's quite funny.
It's just a powder that's then shaped into a twizzle.
It's getting quite a lot of value at this podcast. If you're still listening,
what? Everything is cheap.
Hot flavor, flaming hot flavor, sugar flavorings.
Sugar's actually
sugar.
Yeah. So
what? How much? Being into my nutrition, I should check this.
You probably shouldn't eat as many of these as we do.
What? Eat. Oh no, I was looking at per 100 grams. Yeah, these are. They're about the same as a big pack of prawn cocktail McCoys in terms of carbs.
So you're saying that
if you're interested,
they're maybe not healthy?
No.
Okay.
But what is healthy? Cairngorm Coffee's new Grand Slam blend.
Oh dear. Right, I'm
Get it while it's hot.
I'm going to hide these crisps down here.
Oh!
Get it.
Getting some
We've
absolute...
done so well to avoid your stinking dad jokes for a couple of weeks now. That's a good one.
That's one for the reels.
It is.
Right.
So, back on
you didn't give them a mark out of 10 quickly, just for Krispy Kreme.
less than 8.5. I would say 7 creeds out of 10.
Middle of the road.
No, probably less than that. I don't like you can still. They're in my teeth.
We need to get like an entering and a leaving crisp break motif.
You think?
Music, yeah. Okay, we're back, and we're now. Where were we? I had one thing to talk about with tasting notes.
Well, we're kind of getting on to our own packaging and stuff, so
that's fine.
You can talk about it in there.
Well, a quick one just to carry on from the tasting notes before. Yeah. What I was going to say was, when we were talking about tasting notes that people understand, the other thing is that every culture and location based, they have different.
Yeah.
Something that Adrian taught us in Australia, like a pear tastes different to a pear here, and a banana and stuff, because the closer they are to where they're grown, the more fresh they are, obviously. A banana takes a while to get to the UK. Obviously not grown in Paisley. So
I do get that, but surely not that different.
Well, something to consider.
Yeah, that's kind of blowing my mind.
And we've put on bags quite a lot, something like Skittles.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily widely available.
So before I started working for Cairngorm, that's how you kind of sold me on coffee. So I would go in and buy like a bag of retail coffee, and the ones I would always get were the ones that had like Skittles or fruit pastels on it. You put that on a bag and I'm buying it, and
yeah, but
I don't think it tasted like
come the fringe, American tourist walks in like, what's a fruit pastel? Maybe I shouldn't have done that accent.
What is it? What do they call a fruit pastel in America? I don't know what they call it. Well, they obviously have Skittles, don't they? So we'll just put Skittles on everything.
Yeah, they do. But they have like birthday cake flavour Skittles and stuff like that.
Yeah, they have lots of flavours. Do you know the coffee that I bought, which I think first had Skittles on it, was
Palo Blanco.
Sweet Valley.
Was it?
Yeah.
Maybe we might have used it a couple of times then.
Yeah. Well, Sweet Valley is very much sweety tasting.
Yeah,
kind of
candy.
Candy, yeah, very, very. Which, digressing slightly, but very much that tasting note for me, I was like, that's exactly what I'm going to be into, and I really, really like Sweet Valley, so it worked.
Yeah, but now I feel like sometimes we get quite sick of those super highly sweet candy coffees.
Yes.
They're not, it's not novelty, but it isn't something necessarily that you want to drink every day.
We'll probably get into that as part of this, what we're going to discuss just now, because, if you're drinking coffee every day, you're not going to want a funky or a very, very special type coffee. So where are we going to jump in here? I think probably start with the blend bit. Essentially, why do you, Cairngorm, why does it serve a blend in, I think, Bonnie and Wild and Melville Street cafes? Mm-hmm. Why do we sell a blend there?
Well, we also have, I think we still are selling a blend in Frederick Street, which is the summer banger, even though winter's been and gone.
Yeah.
We obviously freeze our coffee.
Yeah.
Another podcast for another time. But the interesting thing about that is Guilty Pleasures is very much our, it's like the anchor of our offer list. It's the one which is something we put a lot of focus on, and a lot of effort into sourcing well. And part of that is because blends have have historically had quite a bad name in coffee, because they were how you might absorb lesser quality coffees or past crop coffees, etc., cheaper coffees in general. And I use the example of Frederick Street having one because the Summer Banger was a kind of bit of a social experiment of sorts, where we took our two most expensive coffees and put them together to make a summer blend, the Summer Banger, and it tasted fantastic.
Yeah, it tastes really good.
But I still think there is this stigma about blends in specialty coffee, which is, I think the more the world gets messed up and things become more expensive and it becomes harder to run a business because prices explode, people understand the place of a blend more. It's like you do need something stable that's like an anchor point in your shop, which doesn't fluctuate massively in price, doesn't fluctuate massively in in flavor profile so that your customers feel comfortable and don't find it inaccessible because they came in one week and the next week's a completely different coffee and they're like, oh, I don't know if I like that. So long story short, we did a blend for a few reasons. One was a test for ourselves to see if we could make a blend that we loved.
Yeah.
Which I think we've managed to do. We wholeheartedly stand behind the quality of our Guilty Pleasure and the Summer Banger and any other blend that we do. You know, we've done the Lump of Coal over Christmas, you know, and single origin still has a massive part to play in our coffee offer list and, you know, our journey as a business. Like, it is very important to me, but it's a very important tool.
So why are you like? Why do we do it then? Because I think it's again, it probably comes.
That was quite a politician's answer I gave there. I didn't
it was.
say anything, did I?
It was just old Liz Truss over here. Why do we do it? And it comes down to almost tasting notes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And accessibility.
So there's a couple of reasons. One is so we can offer our customers and our wholesale customers a coffee which doesn't deviate massively in quality or flavor expression, I guess, over the course of a whole year, but still allows us to act seasonally. So, you know, when a coffee is then out of season, the next single origin might taste quite different. And what we're trying to achieve, and don't get me wrong, we don't get it right all the time, but our goal is to try and get a flavor profile of a blend, which when one coffee is out of season, and therefore the crop is not as good as it was 6 months ago, we have another coffee that comes through and fits into that blend, which then has the same flavor profile and has the same effect price-wise and flavor-wise, so that our wholesale customers can serve their customers and we can serve our customers in the shop something that they are familiar with. Yeah, so even though it's different coffee, but
less variation basically. So they know if I come into Melville on the 1st of April, I'm going to get the same coffee as I did on the 1st of January. It'll roughly taste the same.
Yeah, well, yes, it could be a completely different coffee, but we want it to be in the same ballpark.
Yeah, well,
so
the blend
they don't
could
feel
be
like, oh, I thought I liked this
components could be different, I guess is what you're saying. The two coffees blended together or three coffees. I think important to note as well there that 50% probably at least, maybe more of the coffees we sell come with milk. So, you know, people are ordering lattes, flat whites. Flat white by far more popular, which again, another podcast. It's, I think 40% of the coffees we sell are probably flat whites versus a latte. But a lot of what you're trying to do with a blend is pair something to go well with milk as well. Yeah.
And there's a topic around that in terms of oat milk being quite a different ingredient to, you know, it definitely adds a little bit more sourness. I was going to say acidity, but it is. And I think, you know, maybe we do need to visit at some point having an oat milk blend and really go down the accessibility route.
But, I like the sound of
that. But I think certainly that's right. I think we identify that to 80% of our customers coming in, coffee was a tool for getting through the day. It wasn't necessarily a thing that they felt needed to be communicated in depth on their every visit. To some people it does matter a lot. To me it does. But I understand the importance of people just coming in and getting coffee. It's not, you know, and I think going back to the start, that was something we were noticing was the entitlement thing comes down to people don't always need to know that their coffee, if we can name drop, Jim Hamilton always used to say a classic thing, which was like, you know, that it was like squeezed out by gorillas in the Niagara Falls jungle and stuff like that. And I got what he was exactly his point was, you know, there's a huge amount of storytelling which is laboured and probably unnecessary. When actually the majority of people just want a coffee that tastes good.
And so what are again, we can quickly touch on this before I guess moving on to the single origins, but what are the tasting notes for our guilty pleasures, for example, you're wanting to hit?
So we go, I would say suitably vague, so that we can sourced throughout the year, because we do want the coffees to be seasonal. We do want them to be fresh and delicious. Yeah. So we need to keep that window wide enough so that we can go from having a Brazil and a Colombian to a Guatemalan and a Costa Rican without it being like, oh, well, this now tastes
completely different.
So to answer your question, we write chocolate,
yeah,
caramel, and stewed fruits,
yeah,
which I think gives a kind of character for, it's.
Is that like a?
It's like a green/red in terms of our colours.
We're trying to go for what's the chocolate bar that maybe has all those things in it, like a
Whisper Gold, maybe, or
yeah. There's a thing with like raisins. I'm thinking like that Yorkie with like biscuit and raisin in it.
Yeah, is that oat and raisin? No,
don't know, but close. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're thinking.
That kind of vibe. Yeah,
and we want that to be consistent throughout the year. And a lot of our wholesale customers want the same thing. And I think that's important to say that the demand for blends is big. If you go into a lot of coffee shops will be serving a blend to try and make sure that your experience throughout the year is as consistent as possible.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned them a lot at the start. Starbucks, Costa, all of these guys, they are serving blends.
Yep.
And essentially that's probably why some of the bad name comes from. But they'll be blending very cheap coffee together essentially.
Yeah.
To create their blends. But yeah, potentially that's why it has got a bad name.
Starbucks is something that we've not got in our notes to talk about.
No.
But on a different tangent, I think Starbucks had a really interesting approach to accessibility as a cafe environment, which is, they historically, and actually we can go on to another classy example, but for this one, Starbucks, they put in sofas, they encourage people to come in, spend time on laptops, and, we've got many opinions on that as a mechanism for making money in a cafe environment.
Yeah.
But there's no doubt that what they were doing was trying to create a place that people felt super comfortable, and then it almost opened the doors to allow them to start educating them on coffee. To be fair, back when they started, they knew a lot about coffee. They just have fallen into that trap where, they haven't had to diversify their, they have started doing the Starbucks reserves to try and get more niche into the more specialty market. Yeah. But they've got such a monopoly over the coffee general market that
of course
you'd be an idiot to think Starbucks is shite.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the thing as well.
They can afford to pay someone who knows way more than I do about coffee. Yeah. So there's a reason they're not doing it.
No. And I think you can't talk about accessibility within coffee without talking about Starbucks, Cafe Nero. All these, they sell way more coffee than all the specialty cafes in the UK put together. So,
do you remember Bean Scene?
I do remember Bean Scene.
And they
on Nicholson Street area.
Yeah, they had them. They had one in St Andrews. They had quite a few, and I used to go to one in Glasgow somewhere. But they were an interesting one. They went down that whole model of Starbucks, but I think it was when the bubble was starting to
third wave
was coming through.
Interesting.
Like Starbucks have managed to get away with selling selling a kind of story of coffee as opposed to being super transparent and having, let's face it, incredible coffee. And I always say, like, Starbucks, you can completely understand the quality, why it's pitched that way, because if they wanted to buy the coffee we're buying, it would service one of their shops in Edinburgh for a week. The whole farmer's whole harvest. It's like, we're talking the scale that they need to buy coffee at.
Yeah.
Small micro lots cannot produce. So for them, what is deemed as a small micro lot is still inevitably a pretty large farm in Brazil or Colombia.
A serious can of worms potentially over here, but we'll again not discuss that on here. But it's along the lines
we're in support of them.
I am for sure, but that, like, I obviously come from my Tream background, sustainability being quite a huge ethos, and obviously it's something we talk about a lot. Specialty coffee is not more sustainable. I feel bad using that word, but if you were to look into the Rainforest Alliance, for example, it's basically a self-certification tick box exercise that goes on the back of potentially certain coffee producers' bags.
It's a sham.
I'm not saying it's a sham, and I don't have a good lawyer, so I'm not willing to fight anyone on this. No. But I do think, we've opened an absolute can of worms here around the impact of needing to buy coffee in the volumes that they need to buy it at the price that they need to buy it at. There is impacts associated with that. I'll end it with that.
Yep. Well, let's move on then.
The biggest rainforest in the world, which loses basically 1 million acres of trees every millisecond. But
Roselle.
the other thing,
niche Highlands joke.
Sorry, this is another quick point around. So at the weekend, I went to, because I was at the airport. So Cafe Nero wanted a long black, couldn't get a long black. I did find that quite bizarre. That
if you asked for it, they would have done it. Would they?
It was just, I got a very large black coffee, and I just find that a bit weird. Yeah, but again, we're getting into a whole tangent there. I want you to start showing off our packaging.
No, well, let's go on to that. We're going.
How many minutes?
Becoming a big chunky one again.
Okay, cool. We'll do like 5 minutes of packaging.
Basically, the packaging. So obviously, this was kind of one of the main things we were going to chat about. We've left ourselves 2 minutes. To talk about
you know what I find hilarious about this is that the tasting note on this coffee is.
I didn't even look at it.
It's not great. It
doesn't really back.
We
must have thrown this one out in a hurry.
We've just talked about how much we've really getting good tasting
notes.
Can we
cover this steak up a wee bit?
No. This is quite funny. This shows you what a shambles it is behind the scenes.
Okay, so let's first of all talk about colours.
Yeah.
If you scroll back on our YouTube, obviously can't do that if you're on a podcast, but we do talk about the colours and what they all mean.
Yeah.
To cut a long story short, they all relate to a kind of flavour preference, I guess, of an average consumer. So
yeah.
We insinuate before, the idea is that if you've bought a red coffee before, we buy seasonally in single origin coffees, so they might not always be available. So if this one is a Las Palomas, the one before was the Andros from Honduras, the one before that was El Plan, also in Honduras, I believe. But they Planadas, Colombia. They generally all have a kind of window of flavour. For us, that is usually sweet, syrupy, red fruits. So the likes of stewed strawberry or syrupy plum and
jam.
Jammy is a good
jammy
example.
Like, yeah.
Raspberry jam, that would fall under red for us.
Yeah.
Whilst an orange, for example, veers more towards the kind of juicy fruits, which is your classic Ethiopian washed. We're talking citric, orangey, stone fruit kind of vibes.
Yeah.
A little bit more clean with more clarity.
Pink grapefruit.
Grapefruit, more acidity.
Yeah.
Going back a bit, if we go to green, we'd say that's more at the start of our range, which is the classic kind of chocolatey. So sweet. I hesitate to say full-bodied, but I think that kind of explains a bit of, it's got generally speaking, will taste better with milk than a orange.
I think a good example of that one at the moment, I think it was at the Agata we were tasting the other day, which was tasting very much like a sort of Reese's
Pieces.
Yeah.
Peanut butter
Reese's Pieces. The peanut butter cup basically is what it tastes like. Which for some people, that plus milk is going to be absolutely right up their street, for example. Yeah. So green's probably better in milk than some of these other ones. But
and then continue on, you've got the purple, which is for most cases a natural or a fermented coffee of some description, which tends to, we were saying before, quite funky.
Yeah.
We usually have more kind of fermented notes of, alcohol or just generally be a little bit more like some of the more kind of candy-ish. You'll get like sweeter, probably more complex, but boozy flavors.
Boozy, we use that quite a lot. Yeah, when we're talking about those. And that comes in again. We're not here to teach people about the making of coffee, but the different processes obviously play into the way those coffees taste. So like you were saying there, a lot of our wilder coffees have slightly nicher processing methods. Not necessarily that niche. Natural is not a niche process. It's different though from the most basic process, which is washed, I think.
For sure. And like all of this is very much centered around Cairngorm. I'm aware that people might listen to this just with an interest in business or an interest in coffee. So we will get to more of a point around this. But I guess it's just all about rethinking what we think is important to customers within specialty coffee, and this for us has certainly broken down some of the not geekery around coffee, but we're trying to use color in this instance as a way of telling a story or giving some information to the customer, which isn't just words they might not understand.
For sure. And, again, when we did this whole packaging redesign, we looked at hundreds of different packagings. We did a lot of marketing research on packaging. And I would say what we noticed, obviously, with coffee is there's a few key bits of information that people feel like they do need on the box. And that's playing to people who maybe have a lot of experience, but we're also wanting to play to people who don't have much experience. I think in that case, that's really where these colors come into it, where we think you don't need to know an origin, you don't need to know a process to know that you like a red coffee, essentially.
We should be, people like the transparent stories, don't they?
Yeah.
A trip inside our minds. That could be a good segment. But
is it?
Our initial, is it still up there? Nah. Our initial, it is. So it says Hero and Fruite up there. But what our initial intention was, and we genuinely threw ideas around for so long when we were doing this, was we weren't going to put farm name. I don't even know if we were going to put origin on the front or process. We were literally going to have names which were literally represented the category. And all the trust was on us to make sure that we sourced coffees that suited the category. And I think we had, an example was Base Camp was going to be like the green coffee.
The green one, yeah.
Wild, I think, was going to be the purple. Can you remember any other names? Well, Hero was going to be the kind of guilty pleasures.
Yeah.
We had a lot. We were trying to make kind of Summit, maybe. We had like a bunch of outdoorsy Cairngorm type names. And we went pretty far down that route, and then what brought us back was this internal fight between heart and head, where, like, head tells me that would have made sense to the majority of our consumers, but heart told me that we didn't want to disconnect ourselves from the specialty community, who thinks it's important to. We, and as one of them, did think it was important to talk. To advertise the process, to advertise the origin, but we were trying to find ways of let's try and find happy mediums. So what were the most important things?
Yeah,
I can't remember. We have eliminated stuff like varietal.
Yeah, elevation, all that kind of
elevation.
stuff. Some bags had a lot of information.
Doesn't have producer on the front, which was a contentious one for a bit.
Yeah,
it does on the rear of the cards. The cards kind of come out, so inside it does say the varietal and the producer. Yeah. But we managed to prioritize what we thought was important, which was origin, process, and notes. And then the coffee obviously either highlights the farm name or the mill name, the cooperative name, or the in some cases, if the mill is too complicated to pronounce, the village the coffee comes from.
Yeah. And I think that's, for us, a lot of the conversations around this came down to accessibility. So from our point of view, we're going to keep going down this route. If the Cairngorm packaging does change, we want to keep in mind that people understand our color coding based on the flavor sort of profile that they want. I think the last thing that we've got on our list around here is talking about Frederick Street, which I think it's quite a cool segue around. That is a slightly different experience we're wanting to provide from a cafe sort of point of view. But we do go, we focus quite hard on these different profiles at Frederick Street from a both espresso point of view, so getting your coffee with milk or your long blacks, but also from a pour over and sort of filter point of view as well. So I'll let you just probably cover off that last kind of. We want Frederick Street to be very accessible to everyone, but also for them to be able to kind of nerd out on coffee if they want as well. Yeah,
but I think the whole purpose behind this was to try and create categories which customers could feel comfortable with, but at no point does it actually describe what a red is or any of these things. So I think when we went to Frederick Street, and obviously if you've followed our progress, we've documented quite heavily what are the Frederick Street had a kind of purpose, and it was almost like a place for us to create a concept of like our, the kind of cafe that we would want to visit ourselves. There are a lot of concepts in there which are differing from our other places. So it was kind of going down the labby route. However, we wanted the coffee to be incredible, to have a lot of options, but we didn't want to have any less of an accessible kind of environment for people to come into. And a lot of the work here, need to give a shout out to Hannah, who is the supervisor there, is now transitioned to be our roaster. Yeah. So who's been doing a phenomenal job of building a kind of place that does feel accessible and comforting, and customers can feel cared for, that they're not just going to be laughed at for wondering what this and that is. And the kind of final menu project has been one that has finally managed to kind of give names to the colours. And it's funny because we went down the route, we were still calling the purple kind of wild, because we're like, that kind of makes sense to us because the coffees taste a bit wild, but they don't really tell much of a picture. So that's when we started just putting on our subheadings of the filter menu. So you have chocolatey, literally as simple as that, which we reference as our greens, but any coffee we buy in for other roasters, we will fill into one of these categories. Then we had the red, which is listed as syrupy fruits. Yeah. The orange is listed as juicy fruits, which people will contend like juicy is not really a term. Yeah. But for us, it tells a story of what the coffee is going to taste like quite well. Yeah. And that, at the end of the day, is all that matters. Then we have funky, which is the purple. And then I think we just have exotic or maybe rare or special release.
Much more,
which is kind of more complex. But we're trying to really almost go back to basics. It's like, I think there's something quite humble about a rugby player, if we'll get on right, who is incredible at their craft, but doesn't like go out there and talk himself up. Is quietly comfortable with their own abilities. And I think we're not trying to brag, not in the slightest, because we are talking about other roasteries coffee here as well. But it's about feeling confident enough to dumb down what we're doing, and not feel like we're doing ourselves out of a job. Because but we're a specialty, so we should, we need to know more. We need to use more complex words that make other people understand that this is why we're getting paid.
Yeah, and I think we could probably almost wrap up on that kind of point, that we're both absolutely delighted with how well Frederick Street is doing from that point of view. Like, I love seeing people going in there, sitting down with a filter menu, and maybe previously they might have found that a bit complex, but by providing those headings, Hannah's done a great job to really kind of, I think, make that menu very, very clear. So quite quickly they can be like, I think I'll probably prefer whatever's in that red section, let's say, or what is in the juicy fruit section. And, quite often we get people in there who get two. They'll try the different two to see which one they prefer. And the other thing that we do obviously there as well is on espresso, you can, get a selection of 3 different coffees, and we kind of, will give a brief sort of explanation on which one's which. But again, you could, do lots with that, couldn't you? Knock your socks off. You're going to get all 3. Yeah. Try 3 flat whites. So,
but I think pitching it in a way which doesn't feel overly, not condescending, but not overly kind of like building it up to be this elaborate thing that people don't understand. Well, we find more people engage with it, and
definitely
want to try.
And that's
all
what
of them.
I was probably trying long-windedly to get there, is that it's quite exciting. So rather than we wanting people probably to feel a bit fearful or scared when they come in because there's 3 espresso options, I guess what we're wanting and trying to create an environment there is that you can be quite excited because there's 3 espresso options. It's quite cool to be able to potentially try 3 completely different tasting coffees. And that, I guess, huge circular thing is what we're talking about when it comes to accessibility. It's giving people the option to try something new and maybe like it. And then if they don't like it, try something else and find what they like. And then once they know what they like, they can keep getting it.
As long as they keep on buying from Cairngorm.
No.
So they might.
Maybe they don't like Cairngorm.
One final question, because we do need to wrap this up. how do you think then, like moving on from here, we make the cafe environment, not just in our shops, but how does one make a specialty coffee cafe environment more accessible?
I think my answer is probably not going to be what you want to hear, but this will be the headline. We're moving towards a lower caffeine environment. And I know we've talked about this before. There was also a newspaper article about it last week, wasn't there? And we didn't really want to touch on it too much because it's an incredibly complicated area. But I think we are moving towards an environment where people will want more lower caffeine options. So right now, if you go into a coffee shop, you're probably only getting one decaf option.
Tell you somewhere where you can get 3.
Where?
Frederick Street.
Yeah,
I don't actually know if they have 3, but I think they've got 3
they
frozen
did for
in
a
the
while,
freezer.
which
Ask them if you want to try.
But I think that is where we are kind of heading. So if you're in Melville right now, we have a really, really good single origin decaf. It tastes absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. But if you want decaf, you're getting one shot. Yeah. And I think we are going to move towards lower calf environments. And I think we're quite keen on that as well. We see, I can understand that.
Yeah, that's good.
Hated it.
Good.
Hated that answer, didn't he?
No, I like that answer.
Did you? Okay. Well, there we go.
There we go. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been another long-winded one.
Has been.
Jack will be excited about editing.
Yeah.
But if you have liked, for goodness sake, subscribe. Please tell your friends. Can't afford to keep on doing this unless you watch and comment and subscribe. And what other things do they have to do?
We can.
Buy our coffee.
We'll just keep doing it.
But yeah, no, seriously, we will keep on doing it if no one watches. But yeah, thank you. And we'll see you next Wednesday for more.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Cheers.
It's interesting as you get into
this one done very fast.
Oh, okay.